before we get to Joris, I would like to see which tribes are out here. As you all know, Joris Luyendijk is an anthropologist, people who study tribes. So let's see which tribe you think you belong to. Let's start with the first tribe, maybe the banking sector. Who's here from the banking sector? I see one hand. Yeah. What's your name and where do you work?
Thomas, but I'm a former banker. Now I'm a sustainability consultant.
You're sitting next to Joris. You should say you're still a banker. Yeah. Who's within renewable energy? That's a big part, big tribe. Let's see. What's your name? Where do you work?
I used to work for Condo, in between jobs now.
Oh, he's looking for a job. All right. And your name is? Q. All right. Q is looking for a job. Another sector, electric mobility, EV. It's also renewable energy, but let's just see it a bit different. What's your name?
Danielle Hoogdijk, ik ben van Schiedam en ik ben van Nieuw Hippie. Ik begeleid consumentenbedrijven naar elektrisch rijden.
Nieuw Hippie, that's a good name. And then let's see, oil and gas maybe? No one. Or some... no one, right? Someone who I didn't mention yet, who is from another tribe? Let's see, which tribe, what's your name, where are you from?
Peter de Boergraaf, Amsterdam.
Municipality?
City, municipality.
Yeah, alright, cool. Yeah. Are there municipality people? No? Alright. Oh yeah, you're from a municipality. Alright, cool. Welcome all. Maybe one other tribe to see who's a student. Nice, quite a few students out here as well. Cool.
And teachers.
What's that?
Teachers.
Teachers. Another tribe. Are you the only teacher or more? Yeah. Two teachers.
Social
Nice.
enterprise.
Social enterprises, good one. Who's working at a social enterprise? Or at social enterprise itself? What's your name and which social enterprise?
Saskia, I'm from Better Places.
Better Places. That's in electric mobility or not? No? Oh, not really. Oh, Better Place, that's another one. Sorry, but that's bankrupt. All right. Let's move on. Welcome all. We will have an interview with Joris Luyendijk together, so you can ask questions as well. Of course, not everyone will be able to ask a question, so brief reminder to keep it short and just a question if it's possible. And then hopefully most people can ask one. Let's move to our guest of today. Born in 1971 in Amsterdam, but he was raised in the old media capital of Holland, which we call Hilversum. During his studies he meandered a bit. He ended up with religious anthropology, and then in 1995 he moved to Cairo and lived there for a year. And the book Een goede man slaat soms zijn vrouw, or A Good Husband Sometimes Beats His Wife, was the result of that. The book led to another episode in his life. He became a correspondent within the Middle East for Radio 1. He worked for the Volkskrant, NOS, NRC Handelsblad, and then he moved back to Amsterdam in 2003. He became the host of Zomergasten and Wintergasten. He interviewed people like Naomi Klein, Desmond Tutu, quite special. And then in 2009, NRC Handelsblad asked him to become the correspondent, new journalism and electric mobility. And that was in a year when literally nobody knew of Tesla, but now we all do. So quite soon in the era. 2011, The Guardian asked him to move to London, and he worked for The Guardian to dive into the world, the tribe of bankers. And that book, Dit kan toch niet waar zijn, or the more appealing title, Swimming with Sharks, was the result of that. Please give him a warm welcome, Joris Luyendijk. We've got a book here between us. May the student in you never die. What about yourself, Joris? Is the student still alive?
Yes, I actually worry about this. It's that I still think that my life is the start. This is all just a dress rehearsal.
You didn't start yet?
No, this is just sort of like playing around. And so yeah, I still try to live like a student more or less. So I have no fixed job, geen vast contract.
You almost never had a fixed contract, right?
No, they don't want me on their payrolls.
And would you want to?
No, because then you have to defend the line of the organization, and it's all painful. And most organizations prefer you to be freelance because of tax reasons. And so we're both very happy. I can walk out whenever I want, and they're not burdened by the idea that they'll never get rid of me.
Nice. The student also refers, for me, to a learning curve, to keep learning. A learning curve is a very important thing in your work. Can you briefly explain what you refer to as a learning curve?
Yeah, it's this idea that most journalism is an update on a process, and most people don't know what the process is. So these are software updates, but you don't have the software. And you can test this for yourself. You've been following, say, the Northern Ireland for 20 years. Now explain what the Protestants are doing there. People have no clue. Explain to me the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims. People have no idea. How did the whole Palestine-Israel conflict come about? And so you can follow the news for 20, 30 years without actually ever learning anything profound about the world. But you do know that the latest development in that process you don't understand. And so I thought, why don't I do journalism, but not what happens today, the news, but what happens every day? And to sort of chart my learning curve, start at absolute zero. So ignorance is bliss, I know nothing. And then every time I learn something, it's sort of this data point on a curve. And so over time, through say columns or sharing my raw material, a learning curve appears. And so it's like taking a course almost.
And you share that course, for example, with The Guardian, you share it in the blog, readers can comment, and that way you build together a learning curve.
Yeah, that's the theory. Yeah.
All right, we will get to that. The idea of this session is to have a learning curve together around, let's say, 3 themes. We will include electric mobility in it, or the broader thing of the electrification of society. The second one is the financial crisis. And the third one is the ecological crisis. So, kind of the aim of the session is to see what in the, oh no, that's another triangle, what's in the triangle of those 3 elements. And we will start with the electric mobility, since that is kind of, let's say, the starting point. But before, just briefly to touch upon that, you moved to Cairo, of which the result was this book. And in that period, there was sometimes that you referred to oil being a terrible thing for a country to have. What do we see here? Are numbers of Aramco. Aramco is the Saudi Arabia state-owned oil company, and they just recently released some numbers about their net profit. So it's not turnover, but it's net profit, net income. And they even have more profit than Apple, which we all thought was the biggest company on the planet. So this state-owned company has the biggest net income. Why is it for Saudi Arabia a terrible thing to have all this oil? Can you explain that?
Well, this is the theory of the resource curse, is that if you want to have democracy, it helps to have to raise tax. Because if you raise tax, your citizens are going to be very interested in how you spend that tax. If you have resources, then the income is generated through the resources. And so the state changes in nature entirely. It becomes you get all these handouts. So the idea of no taxation without representation can be turned on its head. No representation without taxation. And so since the Saudis don't have to tax their people have very little claim on the Saudi rulers, on demanding transparency, participation, all these sort of things. And so when I went to Saudi Arabia, they would always say, like, don't compare us to Norway or the Netherlands, 2 countries that had a functioning democracy when they discovered their fossil fuels. You have to compare us to Venezuela and Nigeria. And essentially what it means is that if you have oil, then it's not just countries that want to buy our oil and want to control the supply of oil. They want to make sure that you spend your oil dollars on their industries. And so when people talk about the Iraq war was about oil, it was also about making sure that all that oil wealth in Iraq would be spent on American companies rather than French companies. And this is why the Dutch, for example, one reason why the Dutch backed the Iraq war is that we were in line for some really juicy contracts. Too bad it didn't really work out. Then again, but that's what makes oil, I think, a curse. And so my idea of the electric car was that the biggest favor we could do the Arab world is to stop buying their oil.
That was already in 2009. There was like a period in which this was kind of the case. This is a picture on the Keizersgracht, I think. We see a Tesla Roadster, one of the early ones, next to not a Saudi Arabian car, but you see the difference, right?
Yeah. It was mostly golf carts in those days, electric cars.
And how did you get to the point, I'm going to study or investigate electric mobility?
Well, it was two things. It was push and pull factor. I was trying to get a scholarship for Harvard for a really interesting program, and they turned me down twice. So I got really annoyed, and I realized that I would have to do something radical, which may, have a fantastic yield, if you like, or a return that was so great that in retrospect I would think, oh, I'm so glad Harvard turned me down, because otherwise this great thing would have happened. And so this is when frustration can be channeled into daring. And so I thought, what would be really radical is I'm going to electrify the Netherlands. And yeah, so I started out at NRC, and they were deeply uncomfortable. They had no idea what I wanted, and they said you could never sustain 12 months of columns, so that around 50 or 45, around the subject of a car that isn't even there. But I thought, no, challenges can be good. And if you give an architect, if you tell an architect, okay, you can build anything you like, there's no limit to your budget, you can use any material, every architect freezes. But if you tell an architect, okay, you have only this budget, and these are the materials, and these are all the other constraints, then creativity flourishes. So I like constraints. So I started writing that column. And yeah, I think it bore out. The governing idea was that...
You're happy that you didn't end up at Harvard in the end?
Yeah, because the electric car, this idea of sharing your learning curve around the electric car, in the end I had this at this conference with Alan Rusbridger, the editor of The Guardian, and it turned out he had an electric car. And so there was finally somebody who had any kind of interest. And then I explained the thinking behind it, that if you want to get people interested in, for example, sustainability, you have to start from a different angle than give them process updates, because it just shuts them out. I skip most news about climate change, for example, because either the news is it's not as bad as you thought, well then I may have well skipped it, or it's even worse than you think, and then I end up feeling depressed and powerless. So I thought, if for sustainability, journalism has to offer this agency perspective. And that might be an electric car where NRC Handelsblad, if at the end of my curve I decide, okay, electric car is a good idea, then let's start distributing NRC Handelsblad with electric cars, and perhaps fundraise it to the readers. And then I was just really unlucky in the sense that NRC was put up for sale. And so for a while it was absolutely impossible for NRC to do anything like changing its distribution or the nature of its distribution, because it may end up in the same hands as Volkskrant or Telegraaf. So that kind of fell flat. I lost the agency perspective. But then Alan Rusbridger came along and he said, I like the idea, why don't you come over to London and do this project not about electric cars, but about banking. Because that's another subject where people get process updates, but they don't have the software.
Before we move to banking, do you stay involved within electric vehicles, or is it now just something?
Well, every now and then when I come across a really thorough, long article, for example in London Review of Books or New York Review of Books or Die Zeit or something, then I'll read it. But I'm actually uninterested in these process updates. But yeah, I think once you dive very deep into a subject, you realize that you can't be halfway in. You're either following it as detailed as possible or not at all.
Yeah. In 2010, you stated two misconceptions about electric mobility. The first one was electric cars will not get there, and the second one is electric cars will get here fast. Both are not true, you said. Is it still the case, you think, or?
I always get really nervous when people quote me back. Yeah.
I just made it up.
Yeah. Well, but then my conclusion was slightly subtle, in the sense that I think electric mobility seemed like a party. So if you invite everyone and everyone thinks that everyone else is coming, then everyone is coming, and then it's a great party. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. And so it's the same with electric mobility. If were everybody to believe in electric mobility, then the infrastructural costs would come down tremendously. That we would pour in money into research, and so it would, in the end, prove its own validity. But since so few people believed in it, I felt that what we needed was more research. And so I set up this jury prize where we gave quite a lot of money, 10,000 euros I think, 15,000 to the best thesis, BA and MA thesis about electric mobility as a kind of stimulus.
And that worked out quite well. This is not for the Netherlands, this is for the US, but it's kind of similar around the world. What we see happening is that like selling the first 1 million electric cars takes quite a while, and you were probably in that first million. And now you see like the time for cars to be sold dropping really quick. Do you feel like some kind of pride, or do you think like, yeah, I did my share in electric mobility, or how does it work for you?
No, no, it's always nice when things work out the way you thought they would. And I felt that with electric cars, generally electric mobility, there was this coalition of such disparate parties. And if one would fall away, you'd still have the other. So there was the nuclear industry, and there was the Israelis, better place. Then there was just generally geostrategical countries that want to wean themselves off fossil fuels for geostrategic reasons, for example, China. And then there was climate, then there was air quality. That's a lot of different groups. You know, I always try to imagine the demonstration. And so you'd have these green lefties walking next to hardened Zionists, or walking next to nuclear fanatics. Fantastic multi-crew of people. So I felt that's probably going to push it through. Also because the alternatives, I followed the electric car long enough to realize that hydrogen power people were always pushing we were always 5 years away from the big breakthrough with hydrogen. And that just moved with the time. So there's a receding horizon. They kept promising it in 5 years. So I felt that would be the only thing that, in my mind, could derail electric cars if something even better came along. But of course, the jury is still out. I mean, there's a lot of hype around it, and I think with batteries, some things have been solved that I think were portrayed earlier as unsolvable or very difficult. I think there's still a lot to be done, and you'll have all these unforeseen consequences. So yeah, most problems start out as a solution to another problem.
We will move to the banking sector in a minute, but before we do that, are there questions around electric mobility or electrification of society? Eric, here we go.
Ja, I have a question. What would be the, even Nederlands, wat zou de beste knop zijn om het nu nog te versnellen?
So what could accelerate the process? You mean in sort of theoretically or very practically? Practically. Well, yeah, I think CO2 trading, emission trading. That would be the key. I think.
Other question. We just move along. Or we can do an whole hour about CO2 trading. What's your name and your question?
Hello, my question is about electric bikes. Do you think there's going to be a rise in their popularity? You talk a lot about electric cars, but I see definitely electric bikes getting a lot of popularity. How do you think that will grow?
You know, to be honest, yeah, I'm really there are other people here who know so much more about these things. I took this up 10 years ago, so I can, you know.
You didn't arrive on an electric bike, right?
No, I just use my legs. But I think with an aging society, that must be very appealing.
Other questions? No, not yet. Maybe later. Oh, here, yeah. You're from electric mobility, so.
And in the rise of the T4, the banking industry played a disproportionate role in promoting fossil fuel cars. What can the banking industry do now to promote electric mobility and solve the problem?
That's a very big question, because the banking industry is very big, as you know. I think it's, yeah, I don't think they really had a role in torpedoing the CO2 emissions trading scheme. I think that's more the, there is of course the issue of how to value oil that will have to stay on the ground. So I think there the banking industry plays a crucial role. I think similarly with the Netherlands, if you would begin to take seriously the possibility that nobody will be able to live here in 100 years, that should kind of impact the value of our houses and that sort of thing. So there are many parties involved who do not want to look too far ahead into the future because it will punish them in the present.
Well, if you move from let's say an oil-run society to an all-electric society, what kind of hurdles do you see there if we really want to get there?
Yeah, a lot, many.
The biggest ones.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned them earlier. I think, you know, vested interests will defend their interests. That's what makes them vested. And so they will find ways. And so I think with, for example, to mobile telephones, PTT was very, very bad at building something up, and ultimately the incumbents just bought the new players. I think with the internet, we're seeing that the new players are buying what's left of the incumbents. So it could work two ways. But it's, yeah, I just really don't have the insight to make it interesting for people who study this stuff every day.
Okay. Let's move to the topic you studied for a while, really intensely. Who has read this book, either in the Dutch version or the English version? Oh, that's the majority. Cool. There's a quote on page 70. Maybe people think, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I don't know, that's the quote I would like to just phrase here, because it really triggered me. It's a quote about a banker who used to work in the banking industry in, let's say, the 70s and the 80s as well. And then the system was different, so the system of ownership was different. He like thought of a new product, like a really smart guy. He thought of a new product, got to his chief and asked him if he should introduce that product. And then his chief responded, "This is my money you're fucking with."
Yeah.
If you link that to, let's say, the ecological reality, we only have to change like 2 words in it, and we get to, yeah, this is our planet you're fucking with.
Yeah, and the problem, I think the problem is quite similar, is that these companies are owned by shareholders who have limited liability. And so the quote is from somebody who was explaining about the old partnership model in banking, where the risky bit of banking was done in partnerships, and partnerships means owners and managers are one and the same. They're personally liable, meaning that nobody will suffer more from the bank going bust than they. And it's quite similar to the system of names with Lloyds. And if you go to the south of England, you go to villages, and people could just point to all the houses where men killed themselves after they were ruined, because they were personally liable for losses they could never cough up, and then the honorable thing to do was to kill yourself. I'm not really calling for that model to come back, but it is in very stark terms just how different it is from what we have now, where these partnerships are either bought up or went public themselves, so they were listed on the stock exchange, and so they went from full personal liability to limited liability. And so suddenly the people up there, they were no longer playing with their own money, they were playing with other people's money. And the damage they caused to society could never be, the shareholders could never be held accountable for them, held liable. And that's, of course, very similar to Shell. We'll never be able to, even if we come up with a number of all the damage Shell has done to the planet, the shareholders will come up, worst case scenario, they lose what they paid for their shares. Well, in German, there's a beautiful book called Strukturierte Verantwortungslosigkeit. Leave it to the Germans to come up with a word like that. And it's a fantastic term, so Verantwortungslosigkeit. So it's this system whereby nobody is finally responsible. And that you find it in banking too. The bankers point to the shareholders say, well, I own so many shares and I have very little influence, and then they refer to the pension funds, and the pension funds refer to the credit rating agencies. They've sort of, made final responsibility disappear. And the founder of capitalism, Adam Smith, always said, the invisible hand works provided there's full personal liability. That's always the bit that bankers like to forget. They like the invisible hand because you can't prove its existence, but they really don't like the personal liability bit.
Do you see that coming back?
No, and the reason is that if you're going to be personally liable for a bank that operates in 180 countries, nobody will want to run a bank that runs in 180 countries, because there's no meaningful way that you'll be able to make sure that in all these countries there isn't something that could send you to jail. I think it would, and you're going to have to find some sort of way of making sure that nobody suffers more from a bank going bust than the bankers themselves. And so I'm sure that if we introduce some sort of personal liability, banks will be less likely to, say, go on this buying spree, buy a bank in Mexico. You'll think twice. Colombia, you'll think twice about money laundering and that sort of thing. But the system we currently have is just, if things go well, you get a fantastic reward, you buy an extra house. Things go wrong, somebody else has to sell their house. That's, you know, it's perverse incentives. You can explain this to an 8-year-old.
Any questions on this topic or related? What's your name and what's the question?
My name is Matthijs. I have a question. You say there's nothing there to change the liability things, but the blockchain and smart contracts could of course change that whole perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
True. Yeah, so if you take banks as they are, I don't see how you could reintroduce personal liability. As for blockchain, I'm still just in awe. I mean, I haven't worked out the position. The only thing that was really helpful was that somebody explained why it's so difficult to explain. Which is that blockchain, as it was explained to me, is that you can basically address everybody in a room that has 7 billion people in it. And so intuitively that's unthinkable. You think a number of people and then they're standing there and the other people are behind them. But they're not. They're all in this circle. And that goes for everyone. And that's again so difficult for human beings to visualize. And that's also when I throw up my hands. So I think probably one of the last researchers to go into finance before this whole blockchain would completely outdate all our research. It's a bit like the Arab Spring that killed my other book.
Other questions?
Jasper, my question is, you explained very well what the system change should be. For example, in the financial world, to avoid future financial crisis. You also say CO2 emissions pricing would be a systemic change to avoid climate crisis. If it's that easy to explain, how do you explain the complacency maybe, or inaction of 95% of the society not asking for these system changes? How is that possible?
Well, we seem to be in this terrifying lab experiment where we're testing just how long people can stay in denial collectively. And so far, the results suggest pretty long. And so I think what this teaches us is there must have been an evolutionary advantage to staying in denial. Or those people who stay in denial for so long would not have made it to the present. And that means that this must be something very deep-seated, that apparently through evolution, when you were thinking long-term, you had fewer chances to survive than if you were thinking short-term. So if you just went out and slaughtered as many buffaloes as you could, you had a better chance of survival than when you were sitting down and thinking, but what about next season? How will the buffaloes do? So you and I are the anomaly. You know, you shouldn't have gone through evolution because you're thinking long-term. And so usually human beings change. Churchill has said, you can count on the Americans to do the right thing. They just have to exhaust all the other alternatives. And I think that's probably true for human beings as well. They're just running through the alternatives to action. It's the same with finance. It says, as long as it's possible to save the current system, they will do it. It's only under extreme pressure that people change. It's similar with smoking or relationships, or when people see any other way of avoiding immediate pain, they'll go for it. And there must be some evolutionary reward.
So we need an apocalypse?
Well, that's the thing. Have we built something? So we need a shock to the system, but have we built something that is that will go down with the shock? So are we still shockable, if you like? And with finance, there's now this fantastic documentary out that's about to go hit the cinemas. The 8th day, the achtste dag, about 10 years ago, Lehman Brothers, September 15, and why haven't we fixed the problem? And that also goes back to this, is that when the system began to wobble, it looked like the entire financial system would crash. And that would mean that distribution or supplies to supermarkets, petrol stations, pharmacies would all stop. And so in despair, basically, we guaranteed all debts that the financial system had, and that stabilized it. We just could not sustain the shock of Lehman going bust, and then all the other banks that had lent too much to Lehman going bust, and then the banks going bust that had lent too much to the banks that had lent too much to Lehman. It would just be a domino, and you think, will, for example, democracy survive such a disaster. And so we decided to bail the system out. But that meant that there was no political capital to take on the banks afterwards, because there's almost no awareness of just how close we were to what kind of abyss 10 years ago. And that seems with climate too. You know, I think we must pray for a shock and a catastrophe, an apocalypse that is sort of a medium-sized apocalypse, that is big enough to wake people up, but not so big that there are no more people to wake up.
There's quite a scary movement in the scene of people who are really wealthy and who see that risk coming. It's called preppers. I don't know if anybody knows about it. Yeah. And one of the things I came across is the Survival Condo project, which you see an image of here. It's basically a hideout for the very rich to get away from this medium or maybe high impact apocalypse, to be safe and just wait a while and have some protection and then see what happens next.
Yeah. Amitav Ghosh, the Indian writer, also believes that Trump definitely and his crowd definitely are convinced of climate change. It's just that they don't feel responsibility, or they don't feel capable of changing it, and so let it just play out. You know, have a bit of Darwinian fun.
Any questions on that? Yeah, I get to you. What's your name and what's the question?
My name is Ina. I was reading the newspaper this morning that the ING bank who wanted to give a 50% raise to someone, and they didn't do it in the end. What surprised me this morning was that even the shareholders seem to have a bit of a conscience saying you can't do this. And I think the other option now was just giving the 50% raise but doing it short in little amounts, not 50%. But the mumbling, the shareholders that were not happy seem to somewhat contradict what you say now. I think because could it be that there's also a softer option, that we do get a conscience, even shareholders, that we don't need a big little.
You don't like the apocalypse story, so is there another option out?
Not necessarily, no, please no. But
is there another option out?
Could it be that shareholders, maybe due to Trump, I don't know, get a conscience?
No.
No?
No, it's the same as shoppers. You poll people and they tell you they give you make all the right noises, and then you look at what they buy and they don't. And so maybe at the lokale afdeling van D66 in Watergaasmeer, there is this turnaround. But I don't see. Maybe I've spent too much time in London.
You're somewhat cynical.
Influx.
Yeah.
The influx of Chinese, Russians. There's zero awareness of all this. And so also when the thing is, if you grow up in a democracy, you're used to the rule of law. So you think that you don't need to grab whatever you can because it can be taken away from you at any time. If you grow up in a dictatorship, that's reality. And so when you have your hands on some sort of privilege, you just go for it. Because everything is, dictatorship is inherently short-termist because there's no rule of law, there's no rechtszekerheid. And right now, the vast increase in population is in countries that are dictatorships. And so you can call me cynical, but I would then call it, I really don't like the word, I would call you delusional.
Well,
and
my sister
so
we can
trade insults, but it's quite useless. I think what we need is to arrive at an hypothesis of what's going on in order to see what the options are. And we don't need the labels.
Other options then? Do you see any other option beside the medium apocalypse?
Well, my favorite, because I'm always told by organizers to end on a happy note, because usually there's a drink, there are drinks afterwards. And then, you know, people die in car crashes because they drink too much. So I've had to come up with some optimism, which is very hard, but I found it. Which is, I think, women's liberation. And so I think that the change required in people's mindset around ecology, also finance, but primarily ecology, is comparable to the change that was required around women's liberation. I did fieldwork in Egypt in 1995. The goede man staat soms zijn vrouw. A good man sometimes beats his wife. That was told to me by women who said that they vowed that they would never marry a man who would never beat them. Now, of course, it's terrible to be beaten, but if you never get beaten, then your husband is this cold-blooded, lizard-like Westerner, who's probably also an awful lover. So they had internalized a kind of patriarchal, self-blaming mindset. And that must have been what Europe was like 200 years ago. And we made that switch really incredibly quickly. And of course, we're definitely not there yet. But if you go back 200 years and you tell people where we are right now, they would no way they'd believe you. So I would say that if we can make that change, also around gay liberation, then certainly there's still hope. It's just right now I think we're in this with women's liberation. There was a lot of work done by people who were just dogged, who just kept at it. And then in 1917, something quite unrelated to all this happened. In 1914, World War I started. All the men were packed off to the front. It was a new kind of war. Suddenly, there were hardly any men left. And women stepped into the void and they began to run society. And they discovered, to their own amazement, that actually they did rather well. And so when the men came back, those that survived, you could never go back to the old situation. And suddenly you see the women's right to vote pop up everywhere. And so a lot of change happens like this. You've got the pioneers, and they just keep at it, and at some point there'll be an opening. And I think the key is not to despair until the opening comes, and when the opening comes, to really seize it. And I think we're now waiting for that opening, and just, you know, that's why I still think the afdeling D66 Gasmeer does useful work, because they are pioneering and they're signaling to society there is a problem. They're working on solutions. They're trying stuff. They learn things. So it's extremely useful. But I think there's a danger in hoping for some quick magical change in mentality, because that's very rare for people to change, for their mentalities to change without any kind of real push.
Other questions? Your name, question?
Yeah, I am wondering, in a positive note, if it would be possible to have a different kind of governance of companies, like for instance where clients become the shareholders, and what you think about it?
There's some really interesting thinking being done also by John Kay, the financial commentator, about why do we still have stock exchanges. Because stock exchanges really date from the time when there were still interest rates. We no longer have these. And most companies that now go public don't do so in order to raise funds in order to invest, but simply for the founders to cash in. And so could we think of a completely different model? And I find that very appealing, also because so many of the distortions today stem from the stock market and the need to keep that stock price high. For example, the fact that we don't have that honest debate and then measures about surveillance is because there are now so many vested interests around keeping the stock price of Alphabet, Apple and so on high. So that it has an immensely distorting effect on society that in the past I think was outweighed by the benefits, but we're now in such a different world that we may not need these stock exchanges. And that could really change.
I saw a question in the back as well. Yeah, I get to you, if it's possible. Yes, definitely. Let's get here a little bit of Jim. You go with your name and question.
Ulrich is my name. Hello, Joris. I have a question. So you have been investigating quite a lot of things. So you're investigating electric cars, you're investigating countries, you've investigated banks. While investigating, you found out a lot of things about them and also a lot of possible solutions. You've written books about them, you told everybody about them, everybody's listening to you, and then they continue doing their normal things. Isn't this super frustrating for you, that everybody apparently knows all these things, but they're not acting on it? How do you cope with that yourself?
Well, the last thing I investigated was a bubbles, and I think it's very tempting to think that because in your own bubble everybody's saying the same thing, that surely in society at large people must be thinking this way. And I would love for you to be right, that everybody's listening to me. But even if you write the best sold book of the year, as I did in 2015, you sell 300,000 copies, which is less than 2% of the population. And it is worth spending a full day Okay, I'll just give you a full evening, 6 o'clock till 12 o'clock, with only toilet breaks, and watch SWSS, including the commercials. Because I think there's such a tendency on the part of the people I deeply sympathize with, the eco warriors, to think that just because in their own little bubble everybody now gets it, then surely that bubble must really be the rest of the world, and it's not. And so sometimes I go to corporations to give a talk or something, and even there, quite high up, there's almost no true awareness or true realization.
So does it lead to frustration for yourself?
Oh, right. My own feelings. I mean, it's this is my job. You know, when we sort this out, I'll move to the other. And this is, you know,
no frustration.
It's but life is frustrating.
But it's just an experiment. You didn't start yet, right?
That's right. Yeah. Maybe that's how I protect myself. Hold on.
You're a father as well. How is that these things happening around you, eco warriors shouting out in the desert? Do you worry about your kids, or is it also something you just black out? I don't think about it.
I think as most parents do, I black it out. Yeah.
Is that for the audience? Who's a parent? Let's raise your hand, parents, and keep your hand up if you just shut it out. Oh, I see one hand going down. That's interesting. You don't shut it out. What do you do?
I'm a life coach.
Ah, so you're the optimistic side.
I think so. I've got a lot of trust in the coming generation. Yeah.
What about you, Joris? Do you have trust in the coming generation? In your own kids?
I'm not sure if this generational, I think the generational perspective on people is really characteristic of a particular generation. So the 68 crowd, who decided, you know, because there were so many of them, that they should run society, and they really built this idea up, that generation is what defines you. And I always find it's temperament. And you find temperaments everywhere. So I'd be more inclined to think, are those with this temperament most suitable to sort the problems out, more or less likely to come to positions of power? And I don't know, I think technology is this tremendous disruptor and an enabler. It seems to bring to the fore people like Zuckerberg, who I think is certainly not evil, but I think is delusional. It seems that certain aspects of reality are beyond his cognitive horizon. And I think quite a few of the tech crowd, the Googles, and they really seem to have externalized evil, to think that other people must be the problem, not us. So they don't make me feel very optimistic. But it's, you know, I remember when I was growing up that there were the patat generatie, the crisps generation we were called. And look how great we are. We turned out. So.
Any other questions? Name and question.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I have a question. Is the solution that the clean technology is getting so cheap that it will be cheaper than running fossil fuels?
Yeah, I imagine that you could think of a techno fix. I do wonder though whether that, and you know, as most problems start as a solution, I think there are so many unforeseen consequences to the possibility that you could basically have free energy anywhere in the world. What that would mean, for example, to nature reserves, I shiver to think. So I do think we need an ethical, moral mind change, and we're very unlucky to arrive in this climate era just when neoliberalism is at its peak, and neoliberalism's central promise is that systems are self-correcting. You don't need morality, and so all we need is just, you know, transparency and a good judicial system. And so if everybody just pursue their own self-interest within the law, market forces will take over. The invisible hand will take care that the outcome is stable, fair, and optimal. And 2008 just saw that theory just crash into the wall. Except there was nothing. The universities had been neoliberalized. The media had been neoliberalized. It's called the strange undeath of neoliberalism. It's very clear that we need a deep sense of morality, but it's almost inconceivable how that would come about.
So clean, sustainable energy is not enough, although in the Arab world, which you know roughly, that's happening like throughout there. It's like big solar parks popping up everywhere.
Yeah, but
Isn't that hopeful? Or
Yeah, well, if you don't, you know, I don't want to talk people down, but if you want to, if clean energy becomes next to free, what it will do to these societies. There are 300 million people who live off fossil fuels, and they live around the corner from us. And so there, in Egypt alone, there are around 90 million people. They don't even know for sure, on an area the size of the Netherlands. And essentially, it's foreign remittances that keeps the place going. And most of those foreign remittances are related to fossil fuels. The Gulf is almost entirely fossil fuels, so it's fantastic.
But this means that it's actually a threat for us.
Immensely, it's an immense threat. If the Arab world no longer has oil revenues, that thing will just come crashing down. And I studied in Egypt for a year at the University of Cairo, and the problem there is not that people are unemployed; they're unemployable. They have been taught almost nothing, and that makes sense because in the dictatorship, the last thing you want is for people to become critical and creative, because they may come up with an alternative to you as the dictator. And so we're in the age of robotization. So you have these unemployable people whose skills will are now being superseded as we speak by robots. So they are economically useless, to say it in very callous terms. And they're in a society that, if we pull off the whole climate thing, will collapse because there are no revenues for fossil fuels. So if you think that that there's nothing else to write a book about.
Other questions? Please raise your hand if you've got a question that you need to be answered, otherwise you cannot sleep tonight. So we know that's 1, 2,
That's raising the bar.
3, 4. Let's start here.
Ik stel deze even in het Nederlands als het mag. Ja?
Joris will translate.
Ik ben een boek aan het lezen van Naomi Klein, dat heet No Time. En wat zij eigenlijk zegt is dat de Wereldhandelsorganisatie wetten heeft opgesteld die eigenlijk contraproductief zijn als het gaat om duurzaam ondernemen. En dat dat dus eigenlijk de reden is dat landen vastzitten, dat ze eigenlijk niet eens kunnen, ook al zouden ze willen. Wat vind je daarvan?
Yeah, so the question is about the World Trade Organization, and that there are also some clauses, and the World Trade Organization effectively governs global trade, and there are all these clauses that prevent countries from adopting more ecologically sustainable measures, and also gives them the opportunity to knock down each other's sustainability projects, which also happens. And I think this is one more example of this neoliberal promise that all we need is just laws, and then everybody will pursue their own self-interest, and we're fine. We don't need morality. And so the WTO is a fundamentally undemocratic organization, because these essential decisions are taken on a plane where ordinary citizens have almost no influence, and their elected officials have almost no influence either. And so that's the thing I hit on with the banking book, is that we have had economic globalization, but no political globalization, and that has made corporations more powerful than democratically elected governments.
Universal morality is lacking.
Yeah, well, I don't even want a world government. I think that world government would not be democratic. The Chinese are not going to give the right to vote to Chinese when they don't give it on the national level. And then what would that be? I mean, what would the opposition to a world government be?
Let's move to the next question.
Yeah.
We have 3 left. One here. Yeah. Any question? Sorry.
Yeah. So I just went back to the whole process and on morality, because I recently read a book and saw a TED Talk by Kate Rathbone, who wrote a book on donut economy, and because she said we have to move away from capitalism at all. And what's your point on that? Do you even think that we can fix climate change within the capitalist system?
I think people mean very different things with capitalism. You know, there's capitalism, the theory, just like socialism. There's capitalism, the theory, and then there's the really existing capitalism. So many people would claim that the crash of 2008 showed the deficits of capitalism. But you might as well argue that it showed that capitalism works, because they no longer had capitalism in the financial sector. And so I think capitalism is this idea that you do not plan centrally. but you leave it to forces that are governed by a set of laws. And so I think it's a quite deep, almost religious divide, whether you think that fundamentally reality needs to be planned or can be left to these opposing forces. And so I think then the question is, if you like the theory of capitalism, will you ever get there from the really existing capitalism? Because the really existing capitalism is really a bunch of oligopolies. And so there's market failure. In an oligopoly, you don't compete, so there's excess profit, and you use the excess profit to defend and protect your oligopoly. It's really like a drug cartel. And so they will never, the actually existing capitalist organizations will never allow you to introduce actual capital, real capitalism. You know, as I say, economists love competition, corporates hate competition.
So at this moment we cannot even know whether capitalism will work because it's not there.
Yeah, it's a bit like Brexit in that sense. It's, and so when it doesn't work, you can always claim, well, we need more Brexit. Just like we need more EU.
So 2 questions left. One at the back. Who was there? Yeah. Yeah. This is a challenge. Here we go.
Yeah, so my name is Willa, and I just wanted to know, you're not investigated as much in the financial sector anymore?
No.
Okay. So you can't really tell us that you have the feeling we're going towards another crisis or not?
Well, the thing is that the essence of capitalism is crisis. I think crisis is what makes capitalism great, at least in theory, because a crisis forces the worst run companies out of business, which is very difficult to do in planned economies, to get rid of the worst performing businesses. There's a difference though between a crisis in, say, the pig farming and a crisis in the financial sector, because the financial sector is the infrastructure in which the capitalist system is meant to work. And then there's a divide. There are those who claim that the crash of 2008 was the problem, and so they've put in all this regulation to avoid a repeat, like generals trying to win the last war. And there are those who say, no, 2008 was not a problem, it was the symptom of a problem. And so if you're simply trying to prevent the reoccurrence of the symptom, then they will just have a new symptom. And again, it will come from a completely unforeseen black swan event kind of corner.
You see that coming? Or will that come?
I think most people I've interviewed, and Jean-Claude Trichet, who's in the documentary I just mentioned, is a moment, believe that the fundamental underlying DNA has not been fixed. The animal is still the same, which is now in a cage, but the animal has very strong teeth and it pays the keeper. And so ultimately the keeper is going to say, okay, I'll let you out. Donald Trump has just effectively done so. And so there's a whole cottage industry in predicting the next financial crash. As of course, if you just keep on shooting, at some point the bird comes down and you're a great hunter. But I think what made 2008 so terrifying is that nobody saw it coming. Again, everybody, you know, okay, so there was the black swan, and everybody thinks swans are white, now there's a black swan, nobody saw it coming. And now everyone's looking for a black swan. But the essence of a black swan is next time it will be a pink potato. It cannot be cognitively foreseen. And so I think I'm with the team that believes that at its deepest level, what caused the crash was that nobody gave a damn. And add to that new technology and a savings glut and a few other things and regulation that's always behind on technology. And then people would just think, okay, so if it's not against law, it must be allowed by the law. And if it brings in money, then shareholders will be happy and I get a cut. And so there we go. This is why nobody went to jail after 2008 almost, because he didn't even have to break the law to destroy the system. So yes, I think we're heading for a new one.
You're a religious anthropologist, right? It almost sounds like we need another religion or a new religion.
Yeah, although every religious anthropologist will probably say we already have one. They just today's religions don't come by that name. But a religion is a structuring a framework that structures experience. And so if you're a humanist or if you're a consumerism has many of the characteristics of a religion. It just has, you know, brought the utopia forward. It has taken it away from the afterlife in the present life. And that's why in consumerism people are terrified of age. because that brings us closer to the end, darkness. There's nothing there. So it has to be the present, and people have to be young. So yeah, we've never done away with religion. Just generally, 95% of the world population is religious. It's just this little corner, this Gallic village in northwestern Europe, where people became atheists, and then they imagined that they were at the forefront of this fantastic. Everyone was on their way to become Dutch. We were the guiding nation. We were the Gidsland.
Right. Let's see the person with the last question. It's quite a challenge because we're now like quite getting to the depressive state, but we might end up positive.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you, Joris, to end on a positive note. We live in a bubble, and in our bubble, as a mission-driven company, we're trying to power lives with sunshine. But we're selling like mad. Everybody is powering their lives with sunshine, their electric cars with solar panels, etc. I've never managed to watch 6 minutes or 6 seconds looking at SBS 6. So I'm going to take advantage of this chance. Can you give us a tip? How do we enter the SBS 6 bubble to actually make solar go mainstream? How do we reach these people?
Yeah, how do we reach these people? I think I'm going to end on a positive thing.
It has to be positive.
It's a lost cause. It's not, and so but go back to the women's liberation. If you had waited to reach the SBSS equivalent watch viewer 120 years ago, we'd still be waiting for the women's right to vote. There are points when you just have to accept that just because you like participation doesn't mean that everybody else likes participation. Just because you are politically interested, everybody else is politically interested. And I did this interview project with SBS voters, many of whom voted PVV. And they go, if I worked all day in a supermarket, I worked very hard. The last thing I want is in the evening to study energy transition. Sort it out. You go to my supermarket, I make sure that you can buy what you want. You are in charge of energy, sort it out. And the difficulty, of course, is that they then vote for a party that makes it impossible for us to sort it out. But I think that ultimately, when that shock happens, and I'll make sure it's just harsh enough, that they will then see, and then we must be ready. So I think, and a bubble now has a very negative connotations, but a bubble also is protective. It is useful. There must also be evolutionary advantage to being in a bubble. It is also helpful not constantly to have to watch SBSS and talk to these people, and they're ignorant and cynical and stupid, and they hate you for trying to save them, essentially. And to just leave them aside, and ultimately they'll benefit. And so,
but how do you then sell solar panels to them?
Well, you don't sell it to them. You just sell it to the corporations, housing corporations that own their home.
Perfect. Nice. Easy. Joris, thanks a lot. 1 second. Joris, thanks a lot for being here. Tonight you will go to the Bali for the premiere of the 8th day, and you will interview Trichet, the former ECB president. So we might see some change happening soon, to end on another positive note. And we've got a little present here for you, for being here today with us. If you think what's in there, this is in there. It's like a plaquette to put on top of his bed, or give to your kids, or do whatever with it, what you want. If you want to participate in the next Climate College Tour, just keep an eye on the social media or on your mail. And afterwards, Sungevity, who is one of the hosting parties, has some vacancies. So Giel, you're looking for a job, come get to the desk. There might be a vacancy for you. Thanks a lot for being here, and see you next time.